I woke up from a 6-hour surgery to 87 missed calls and a voicemail from my father. He sounded cheerful, announcing that since I wasn't using my condo, he'd gone ahead and sold it for $425,000. There was just one problem. I never signed a single paper, and they had no idea I held the deed to the house they were sleeping in every night. My name is Avery Harper, and the first thing I realized when I woke up was that my body no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the anesthesia, to the dull and throbbing ache in my lower abdomen, and to the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside my bed. I was 34 years old, lying in a recovery room in Denver, and my mouth felt like it had been stuffed with cotton. A nurse hovered over me, checking the vitals displayed on the screen. She smiled when she saw my eyes flutter open. She told me the surgery had gone well, that it had taken 6 hours, and that I should try to rest. But my brain was already clawing its way out of the fog. I needed to know what time it was. I needed to know if I was still whole. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. My hand shook uncontrollably. A side effect of the drugs, or perhaps just the trauma of being cut open. I tapped the screen. The light stung my eyes, but the notifications that flooded the display hurt worse. 87 missed calls. The number sat there on the lock screen, terrifying and impossible. 87, not 5, not 10, 87. My stomach dropped, ignoring the surgical incision. My first thought was a catastrophe. Had there been an accident? Was someone dead? The calls were a mix of names that usually brought me a sense of obligation rather than joy. Mom, Dad, Paisley. Then I saw the voicemails. There was a string of them, but the most recent one was from my father. It had been left 40 minutes ago. I pressed the phone to my ear, my fingers trembling against the hard plastic case. I expected panic. I expected a somber voice telling me that a tragedy had struck the family. Instead, I heard my father laughing. It was a jovial, booming sound, the kind he made when he had successfully negotiated a discount on a new car or won a small bet on a football game. His voice filled my ear. Avery, honey, you are probably still under, but we have fantastic news. We managed to close the deal. I know you were worried about the market, but we got it done just in time. We sold the condo. The buyers wired the deposit an hour ago. $425,000. Avery, can you believe it? It is enough to cover the venue and the catering upgrades for Paisley. We signed the papers for you since you were in surgery. We will talk when you wake up. Great news, right? Love you. The message ended. The automated female voice asked if I wanted to replay or delete. I did not move. I did not breathe. For a moment, the words did not compute. Sold the condo, my condo. The one I had bought 4 years ago with my own bonus money. The one I had renovated with my own hands on weekends. The one that was in my name, and my name alone. $425,000. They had sold my home while I was unconscious on an operating table. The tears I expected did not come. The panic that had gripped me when I saw the 87 missed calls evaporated, replaced by a sensation that was entirely new. It was a coldness that started at the base of my spine and spread outward, freezing my nerve endings. It was as if my brain had recognized a threat so severe that it bypassed emotion and went straight into survival mode. I sat up. The pain in my abdomen screamed, a sharp and tearing sensation, but I ignored it. I needed clarity. I needed to be absolutely certain I had heard him correctly. I dialed my father's number. He picked up on the first ring, his voice loud and cheerful, background noise suggesting he was somewhere public, perhaps a restaurant. Avery, you are up. We were just toasting to you. I wetted my dry lips. My voice came out raspy, sounding like gravel grinding together. You sold my apartment. I did not phrase it as a question. Yes, Dad shouted, oblivious to the ice in my tone. It was a whirlwind. Honey, the agent said we had a very narrow window to get that price. Cash offer, no contingencies. We knew you were not using it much since you have been so busy with work. And with the wedding costs spiraling, it was the only way to make sure Paisley got the Beaver Creek venue. I stared at the white wall across the room. I was not using it much. I lived there. It was my primary residence. I had slept in that bed the night before I drove myself to the hospital. I asked the question that mattered. The legal question. Who signed the deed? Dad? There was a pause on the other end. A slight hesitation that told me everything I needed to know. The background noise seemed to dip. Well, Dad started, his voice losing a fraction of its boom. We handled it. You know, family helps family. We did not want to bother you with paperwork while you were prepping for a major surgery. It was a chaotic morning. Who signed my name? I repeated, my voice gaining strength despite the dryness in my throat. My mother's voice suddenly cut in. She must have been listening on speakerphone. Oh, stop it. Avery, do not use that tone with your father. We stepped up to handle a crisis. Paisley was hysterical about the deposit. We did what had to be done. You should be thanking us for taking the stress off your plate. You always get so bogged down in the details. The details like property rights. The details like felony fraud. You forged my signature. I said, it was a statement of fact. We acted as your proxy. Mom snapped. Stop being so dramatic. You are barely out of anesthesia. You are confused. We will explain everything when you are feeling more like yourself. Right now. Just focus on healing. We have the check. Everything is fine. The way she said it, smooth, practiced, dismissive, triggered something deep inside me. This was not a frantic decision made in the heat of the moment. They had 87 missed calls on my phone not to ask for permission, but to create a paper trail of attempted contact so they could tell themselves they tried. They had lined up a buyer. They had likely been negotiating this for weeks, waiting for the one day I would be physically unable to stop them. The day of my surgery. They had timed it. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. They truly believed that because I was their daughter, my assets were simply a reservoir for the family's needs. Specifically, for Paisley's needs. Where is the money? I asked. It is safe, Dad said, his jovial tone returning now that he felt the conversation was moving past the accusation phase. It is in the wedding account. We have already paid the deposit for the venue and the florist. $18,000 for flowers. Avery, can you imagine? But it is going to be beautiful. You will be so proud. I closed my eyes. They had already spent it. They had liquidated my net worth and turned it into hydrangeas and a ballroom rental in the mountains. I'm going to hang up now. I said, get some rest. Honey, Mom said, her voice softening into that cloying, fake maternal tone she used when she wanted to smooth things over. We will come visit you tomorrow. Maybe bring you some of that soup you like. I ended the call. I lowered the phone to my lap and stared at my legs covered by the thin hospital blanket. The room was silent again, save for the monitor. The beep was steady, 70 beats per minute. I was calm. I was terrifyingly calm. They had sold my home. They had forged my signature. They had stolen $425,000 from me and spent it on a party. And they thought I would let it go. They thought I would do what I had always done. Sigh, complain, and then eventually absorb the loss, because that is what Avery does. Avery is the strong one. Avery has a good job at Redwood Arc Systems. Avery can always make more money. Paisley needs it more. Paisley is fragile. I looked at the date on my phone screen. It was a Tuesday. I opened my contacts list. I did not scroll down to my friends. I did not call my boss. I scrolled past the family group chat that was currently lighting up with messages from Paisley sending heart emojis and champagne glass stickers. I stopped at a name I had not spoken to in 4 years. Dylan Kruger. He was a real estate attorney who specialized in difficult titles and fraud. He was the man who had helped me navigate the complex, messy purchase of a foreclosure property 4 years ago, a property my parents knew nothing about. I pressed the call button. It rang 3 times. Dylan Kruger speaking. His voice was professional, clipped, devoid of the emotional baggage that saturated my family's voices. Dylan, I said, it is Avery Harper. Avery, he said, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. I have not heard that name in a long time. Is everything all right? You sound Different. I am in the hospital. I said, I just got out of surgery. I am sorry to hear that. He replied politely, Do you need me to call someone for you? No. I said, I need you to look up a property record for me. Right now. Go ahead, he said. The sound of a keyboard clacking instantly audible in the background. My condo. Unit 4B. The Aston Building. I waited. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, filled only by the typing. Okay, I see it, Dylan said slowly. It shows a transfer of deed recorded this morning. Sale price $425,000. Seller, Avery Harper, buyer. An LLC called Mountain View Assets. It looks like a cash deal. Expedited recording. I took a deep breath. The air in the hospital room smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. Dylan, I said, I did not sign that deed. I was under general anesthesia from 8 this morning until 2 this afternoon. The typing stopped abruptly. Say that again, Dylan said, his voice dropping an octave. My parents just called me. I said, they told me they sold it. They admitted to signing my name. They said it was to pay for my sister's wedding. There was a long silence on the line. Then, Dylan let out a low whistle. Okay, he said. Avery, listen to me very carefully. This is title fraud. This is forgery. Depending on the state laws and the amount, we are looking at a first-degree felony. Do they have a power of attorney for you? A legitimate one? No, I said, never. Then the transaction is voidable, Dylan said, his lawyer mode fully engaged. But if the buyer is a bona fide purchaser who did not know about the fraud, it gets messy. We can fight it. But your money, if they have already moved the funds, they put it in a wedding account. I said, they have already started spending it. Avery, Dylan said urgent, I can file an injunction. I can freeze that account within 24 hours. I can have the police at their door by dinner time. Do you want me to pull the trigger? I looked at the 87 missed calls. I looked at the text message preview from Paisley. Thank you, Sissy. You are the best. I thought about the $425,000. I thought about the $18,000 for flowers. But then I thought about something else. I thought about the other house, the one Dylan had helped me buy 4 years ago under the anonymity of an LLC, the house my parents were currently living in. The house they thought they rented from a faceless corporate landlord. Their lease was up for renewal in 2 months. If I sued them now, they would play the victim. They would cry to the extended family that I was sending my own parents to jail over a misunderstanding. They would ruin my reputation before the ink on the lawsuit was dry. They would make me the villain who destroyed Paisley's wedding. No, I did not want to just win a lawsuit. I wanted them to feel the ground disappear beneath their feet. I wanted them to understand exactly who owned the roof over their heads. Avery? Dylan asked. Are you still there? I am here, I said. Do you want me to file? No, I said softly. Not yet. Not yet? Dylan sounded confused. Avery, every hour we wait is an hour they can spend that money. Let them spend it, I said. Let them spend every single cent. Let them book the band. Let them print the invitations. Let them think they got away with it. I do not follow, Dylan said. I need you to get the paperwork ready. I said, get the affidavits for the forgery. Get the hospital records proving I was unconscious. Prepare the entire case, but do not file it. And Dylan? Yes? Pull the file on Harper Ridge Holdings, LLC, the shell company, Dylan said. The one that owns the house on Maple Street. Yes, I said, the house my parents live in. I heard the smile in his voice before he spoke. I see. They want a family contribution. I said, my voice cold and steady. I am going to give them one, but first, I need to recover. I need to be able to walk, and I need them to believe that I am too weak to fight back. I understand, Dylan said. I hung up the phone. My body was broken. My bank account was empty. My home was sold. I lay back against the stiff hospital pillows. I watched the heart monitor trace the steady rhythm of my pulse. I was not going to cry. Tears were for people who had options. I did not have options anymore. I only had a plan. They wanted me to be silent because they thought I was weak. They thought the surgery and the shock would make me compliant. So I would be silent. I would answer their calls. I would listen to their updates about the wedding. I would let them think they had won. I would be silent to prepare. And when I finally spoke, I would not need to raise my voice. I would just need to sign my name, my real name, on an eviction notice, to understand how my parents could sell my home while I was unconscious. You have to understand who I was to them 7 weeks ago. I was not a daughter. I was not a person with needs or vulnerabilities. I was an asset that required zero maintenance. I was the family's structural load-bearing wall, invisible, taken for granted, and assumed to be indestructible. 7 weeks ago, I was sitting in my corner office at Redwood Arc Systems in downtown Denver. My official title was Senior Data Risk Manager. My job was to look for cracks in systems, to predict catastrophic failures before they happened, and to patch them. I spent 10 hours a day staring at code and compliance reports, looking for the tiny variables that could bring a billion-dollar infrastructure crashing down. It is a bitter irony that while I was paid 6 figures to protect corporate data, I failed to see the breach occurring in my own living room. The accident that landed me on that operating table was not cinematic. It was a Tuesday in late January. I was driving home on I-25. The roads were slick with that deceptive, glassy sheet of black ice that makes Colorado winters treacherous. A truck 2 lanes over lost traction. He clipped a sedan, which spun out and clipped me. My car did not flip. It did not explode. It just slid, heavy and helpless, into the concrete median at 50 miles per hour. The airbag deployment felt like a punch to the face. The seatbelt saved my life, but the force of the impact tore through the soft tissue in my abdomen and did structural damage to my lower spine. I did not lose consciousness then. I sat in the wreck, shivering as the cold air rushed in through the shattered window. And I did what Avery always did. I checked my vitals. I called the police. I called my insurance. I arranged for a tow truck. I did not call my parents until I was in the emergency room. After the adrenaline had worn off and the pain had set in like a heavy, wet wool blanket, I called my mother first. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was distracted, breathless. Hello? Avery? Make it quick. Honey, Paisley and I are at the fabric store. We are having a crisis with the table runners. The sage green is looking too gray under the banquet lighting. I lay on a gurney in a hallway filled with the smell of rubbing alcohol and old blood. A doctor was palpating my stomach, causing white-hot flashes of agony to shoot up my ribs. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was in a car accident. There was a pause. I could hear rustling in the background, the sound of heavy bolts of fabric being moved. Are you okay? She asked. You sound okay. I am at Denver Health. I said, the car is totaled. I have some internal bleeding and a spinal injury. They are admitting me. They think I need surgery, but they have to wait for the swelling to go down. Oh, Avery, she sighed. The way one sighs when it starts raining right after a car wash. That is terrible timing. You know Paisley's engagement party is in 3 weeks. You are going to be on crutches in the photos? I closed my eyes. The doctor looked at me with sympathy, but I waved him off. I was used to this. I do not know about the photos. Mom, I said, I am worried about the surgery. It is a major procedure. Well, you are tough, she said dismissively. You have good insurance, right? You always handle these things. Just keep us posted. Oh, wait. Paisley wants to know if you still have that vintage velvet clutch, the one you bought in Italy. It would go perfect with her rehearsal dinner look. I stared at the ceiling tiles. I was bleeding internally. My sister wanted my purse. No. I said, I do not know where it is. Okay, well, look for it when you get home. We have to go. The consultant is waving at us. Text us when you are out of the ER. She hung up. That was the dynamic. That had always been the dynamic. My sister, Paisley Harper, was 29 years old. Her profession, if you could call it that, was lifestyle bridal creator. She lived her life through a ring light. She had spent her 20s drifting from one low-effort job to another, receptionist at a yoga studio, social media intern for a failed juice brand, before realizing that being pretty and getting married was a viable career path if you packaged it correctly. She had been planning this wedding since she was 6, but now that she had an audience of 50,000 followers on Instagram and TikTok, the stakes were higher. She wasn't just marrying Caleb Sterling, she was launching a brand. She needed the narrative to be perfect. The venue had to be Beaver Creek, the flowers had to be imported peonies, the dress had to be custom, and I was the background character, the pragmatic older sister. I sat in that hospital bed for 3 days while they monitored my vitals. My parents visited once. They stayed for 45 minutes. They brought me a bag of stale bagels and spent the entire time complaining about the cost of the wedding band. My father, a man who had retired early from a mid-level management job and never quite adjusted to a fixed income, paced around my small hospital room, $18,000 for flowers. "Avery," he had said, shaking his head. "Can you believe it? But Paisley says it is an investment. If this goes viral, she could get sponsorships for home decor." He looked at me, lying in the bed with IV tubes in my arm. "You are lucky," he said. "You have that good job. You do not have these worries." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I had worries he couldn't imagine. I wanted to tell him that I was terrified of the surgery. I wanted to tell him that living alone in a city, facing a 6-month recovery with no one to help me put on my socks, was a terrifying prospect, but I didn't, because years ago, I had been branded. I was the competent one, the one who didn't need help. This label, the one who can handle it, is not a compliment. It is a cage. When I graduated college with honors, they sent a card. When Paisley finished a 6-week esthetician course she never used, they threw a party. When I was promoted to director level at 28, they asked if I was working too hard. When Paisley got dumped by a boyfriend she had known for 2 months, my mother flew to Arizona to stay with her for a week because she was fragile. They assumed I was made of steel, and they assumed Paisley was made of glass. So they threw stones at me and built cushioned walls around her, the greatest symbol of my independence. And the thing that apparently grated on them the most was my condo. I bought it 4 years ago. Unit 4B in the Aston. It was not a starter home. It was a statement. It was a luxury 2-bedroom apartment with a view of the Rockies, smart home integration, and a doorman. I paid for it with money I made from stock options and grueling 80-hour work weeks. It cost $425,000 then. Though the value had skyrocketed since it was my sanctuary, it was the one place where I did not have to be the responsible daughter. I could just be Avery. The walls were painted the colors I liked, cool grays and sharp navies. There were no mood boards here, no wedding magazines, just silence and order. My parents hated it. They never said they hated it. They just made small, cutting remarks. "It is so big for one person," my mother would say, running her finger along my granite countertop. "Do you not feel lonely here? It feels like a hotel. It is a lot of equity to have tied up in a bachelor pad," my father would add. "If you sold this, you could buy 2 rental properties in Fort Collins. Passive income. Avery, that is the smart play." They looked at my home and saw a resource that was being wasted on my solitude. They saw a pile of cash that was just sitting there, serving no one but me. And in the Harper family economy, resources were meant to flow toward the person with the most immediate need. And Paisley always had a need. In the weeks leading up to my surgery, as I waited for the inflammation to subside so the doctors could operate, the questioning from my parents became more specific. It was subtle, but looking back, it was a reconnaissance mission. I was resting at home, managing the pain with medication, trying to get my affairs in order. I had hired a post-op nurse because I knew my mother would be too busy with dress fittings to help me change my bandages. My father came over to check on the furnace, a task I had not asked him to do. He spent 10 minutes in the utility closet and an hour sitting at my kitchen island, drinking my coffee. "So," he said, casually tapping his fingers on the marble, "how does the disability insurance work with your job? You get full pay while you are out?" "Yes, Dad," I said, It is covered. And your savings? You are not dipping into that for the medical bills? I have an emergency fund. I said, I am fine. That is good. He said, that is really good. You know, the market is high right now. Real estate. I was reading that condos in this area are going for a premium. Inventory is low. I looked at him. I was wearing a back brace and sweatpants. I was in no mood for market analysis. I am not selling. Dad, I love this place. Of course, he said quickly, raising his hands in surrender. I am just talking, just thinking about your future. You never know what life throws at you. Sometimes it is good to be liquid. He wasn't thinking about my future. He was thinking about the deadline for the final payment to the wedding venue. It was due in 3 weeks, exactly the same week as my scheduled surgery. They knew I had the money, they knew I had the asset, but they also knew I had boundaries. I had said no to the $18,000 flower budget. I had said no to the $12,000 band, so they stopped asking. I thought they had accepted my refusal. I thought they were finally going to force Paisley to live within a budget, or perhaps take out a loan herself. I was naive. I was applying the logic of a risk manager to a situation that was governed by the logic of parasites. Parasites do not stop when the host resists. They just find a softer entry point. 3 days before the surgery, I was clearing out my email inbox, setting up my out-of-office replies. I was tired, anxious, and foggy from the painkillers. I saw an email from a title monitoring service I had subscribed to years ago. It was an automated bot, one of those services that scans public records for your name. Subject: Title Watch Alert. Inquiry detected. I almost deleted it. I got these alerts sometimes when I refinanced, or when the HOA updated their bylaws. I hovered my mouse over the trash icon, but something made me click it. An inquiry on the property at 1045 Lincoln Street, Unit 4B, has been made by a licensed real estate agent. Reason: listing preparation. I frowned. Listing preparation? I hadn't hired an agent. I hadn't listed anything. I picked up my phone to call the title company, but before I could dial, a wave of nausea hit me, a side effect of the new medication. I ran to the bathroom. By the time I came back, Paisley was calling me, sobbing about a seamstress ruining the hem of her second reception dress. I spent an hour calming her down. I told her it could be fixed. I told her she would still look beautiful. I played the role of the steady big sister. By the time I hung up, I had forgotten about the email. I told myself it was probably a glitch, or maybe an aggressive realtor cold-calling the building. I told myself I would look into it after the surgery. I didn't know that the inquiry was my father handing a copy of my driver's license, which he had photocopied from my wallet while I was sleeping on the couch during his visit, to a notary who didn't ask too many questions. I didn't know that while I was comforting my sister about her hemline, she was texting my mother. Did he get the keys? We need to stage it by Friday if we want the cash by the wedding. I went into that surgery thinking I was alone. I went in thinking that the worst thing that could happen was a complication with the anesthesia. I was wrong. The complication wasn't medical. The complication was that I had spent 34 years teaching my family that I was unbreakable, and they had finally decided to test that theory to its absolute limit. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to strip mine my life to pave the road for Paisley's perfect day. And the most painful part wasn't the theft itself. It was the certainty, the absolute, unwavering certainty that they felt entitled to do it. They didn't see it as a crime. They saw it as a reallocation of resources, from the one who didn't need it to the one who deserved it. I closed my laptop. I packed my hospital bag. I drove myself to the admissions center in an Uber because my parents were too busy meeting with the caterer to give me a ride. I checked myself in. I handed over my clothes and my phone, and as the anesthesia took hold, the last thing I thought about was that email. Listing preparation. I should have known. In the Harper family, I was never the owner. I was just the placeholder. To understand the sheer velocity of the betrayal, you have to look at the engine driving it. That engine was Paisley's wedding vision board. It wasn't just a Pinterest page. It was a military campaign. The theme was Black Tie Mountain Chic. The location was Beaver Creek, a ski resort town where the air is thin and the prices are astronomical. Paisley did not just want a wedding, she wanted a coronation. She wanted 220 guests to fly into the Colorado Rockies, traverse snowy passes, and witness her say "I do" in a custom gown that cost more than my first car. 7 weeks before the surgery, while I was navigating insurance approvals and short-term disability paperwork, the financial demands from Fort Collins began to arrive with the regularity of utility bills. They did not ask for money. They presented me with opportunities to contribute. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday night. I was icing my back, lying flat on my rug, staring at the ceiling. "Avery," my mother's voice chirped, skipping the pleasantries. "We have a situation with the florals." The quote came back for the ceremony arch. I closed my eyes. "How much?" "Mom?" $18,000, she said. I almost dropped the ice pack. $18,000? For flowers? "Mom, that is a down payment on a Honda." "It is not just flowers," she snapped. Defensive immediately. "It is imported white hydrangeas, orchids, and structurally reinforced greenery to withstand the mountain wind. It is an engineering marvel." "Avery. And look, we are a little stretched with the deposit for the venue. We thought you might want to handle the flowers, as your gift to your sister." I took a slow breath. The pain in my spine was a dull throb, a constant reminder of the metal and glass that had crunched into my life weeks ago. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice low, "I am having major surgery in a month. I have deductibles to meet. I have to pay for a private nurse because you guys are too busy to help me. I cannot drop $18,000 on orchids." There was a silence on the other end. It wasn't a silence of understanding. It was the silence of a customer who has been told her coupon is expired. "Well," she said, her voice turning brittle, "I suppose we can cut the arch. Paisley will be devastated. She had a vision of entering through a tunnel of white blooms. But if you cannot do it, you cannot do it. We will just tell her you said no." The guilt trip was precision engineered. They knew exactly where to press. 2 days later, it was my father, the band, Avery. We found this 12-piece ensemble from Denver. They play jazz covers of top 40 hits. Very classy. They want $12,000 for the night. The Sterling family is covering the rehearsal dinner, so we feel it is only right that the Harper side covers the entertainment. It would look really good if you sponsored them. We could even have the MC thank you during the reception. I am not sponsoring a band." "Dad," I said, typing an email to my surgeon's office with one hand, "I am trying to make sure I can walk properly next year. You are always so dramatic about money." He grumbled. "You have that tech salary. You have savings. What are you hoarding it for? You are single. You do not have kids. This is a family milestone." That was the refrain. You are single. You do not have kids. In their eyes, my lack of a husband and children meant my income was discretionary. It meant my safety net was actually their slush fund. The final straw regarding the contributions came a week later. They invented a concept called the family gift. It was a lump sum of $10,000 they wanted to present to Caleb's parents as a gesture of goodwill and shared values. I refused that. 2, and that was when the temperature dropped. My mother told me, in a voice devoid of warmth, "You are always selfish at the most important times. You think because you live in that high-rise and drive a nice car that you are better than us, but when it comes to showing up for people, you are empty." "Avery." I hung up the phone and sat in my silent, beautiful apartment. I looked at the walls I had painted. I looked at the furniture I had bought. I felt a profound sense of isolation. I spent the next week preparing for my surgery like I was preparing for a siege. I did not have a mother coming to make me soup. I did not have a sister coming to fluff my pillows. I hired a post-operative care specialist named Brenda. I paid her $70 an hour to pick me up from the hospital and stay with me for the first 48 hours. I went to the grocery store and bought 3 weeks' worth of food. I cooked it, portioned it into glass containers, and froze it. I labeled every container with the date and contents: chicken soup, chili, vegetable stew. I moved my furniture to create wide walking paths for a walker. I installed grab bars in my shower. I set up a medication station on my nightstand. I did it all alone, and while I was scrubbing my bathtub, preparing my home for my convalescence, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Paisley. I picked it up, expecting an apology, maybe a "good luck with the surgery." Instead, it was a link to a Zillow listing, a studio apartment in a cheaper part of town. "Hey, sissy," the text read. I was thinking, since you are going to be laid up for a while and you are all alone, maybe you should downsize? That condo is huge for just one person. If you sold it, you would have so much cash. You could travel. You could help us make the wedding perfect. Why do you need 3 bedrooms anyway? You are single. LOL. She added a crying, laughing emoji, as if suggesting I sell my home to fund her party was a cute joke. I stared at the screen. The LOL felt like a slap. It wasn't just a request. It was an insight into their worldview. To Paisley, my condo wasn't a home. It was a piggy bank that she hadn't figured out how to smash open yet. They didn't see my property rights. They saw wasted potential. They saw equity that was sitting idle when it could be converted into social capital for them. They weren't asking me for help. They were assessing my liquidity. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. It was the realization that my family didn't just envy my success. They felt entitled to cannibalize it. That same afternoon, things started to get weird in ways I didn't fully register at the time. I was at my pre-operative appointment, sitting in a paper gown, waiting for the anesthesiologist. My phone was in my purse, buried under a pile of forms. When I finally checked it hours later, I saw a notification from Google. New sign-in detected, Windows device, location, Fort Collins, Colorado. I frowned. I lived in Denver. My parents lived in Fort Collins. But my parents didn't have my passwords. I was meticulous about security. I used 2-factor authentication for everything important. But then I remembered. I had logged into my email on my old laptop, the one I had lent to my dad 3 months ago when his computer crashed. I had thought I logged out. I had thought I cleared the cache. I dismissed the notification. I told myself it was probably Dad opening the browser and it auto-connected to my old session. I told myself he was just looking for a recipe or checking the news. I was too tired, too in pain, and too anxious about the surgery to spiral into paranoia. I changed my password on my phone, just to be safe, and moved on. I missed the second warning. 2. It was a message from Dylan Kruger. I hadn't spoken to Dylan in 4 years, not since we closed on the Harper Ridge Holdings property. He handled the annual filings and the taxes for that house, keeping my name completely off the public record. We rarely communicated. The text had come in while I was arguing with the insurance company about coverage limits. "Avery, please call me. I got a weird flag on the county clerk monitor. Someone is asking about the deed structure on your primary residence, not the LLC house, your condo. Call me." I saw the preview of the text. I saw deed structure and condo, but my brain filtered it. I thought he was asking about a tax document. I thought he was trying to upsell me on some estate planning service. I thought, I will deal with this after the surgery. I didn't open it. I swiped it away. I was so focused on the physical threat, the scalpel, the anesthesia, the recovery, that I completely ignored the legal threat circling my perimeter. I went into that hospital thinking the worst thing my family could do was ignore me. I thought their cruelty was limited to neglect. I thought they would just leave me alone to rot in my apartment while they partied in Beaver Creek. I didn't realize that their neglect was a cover. While I was busy freezing soup and hiring a nurse, they were busy becoming me. They had my driver's license scan. They had my social security number from old tax returns. They had access to my email for that brief, crucial window before I changed the password, just long enough to intercept a verification code or reset a login. And they had the arrogance. That was the most dangerous tool in their arsenal. The absolute, unshakable belief that they were doing the right thing. I remember the night before the surgery. I was lying in my bed, the city lights of Denver glowing outside my window. I felt small. I felt vulnerable. I texted my mom. Going in at 6 tomorrow. Love you guys. She replied 3 hours later. Good luck. We are meeting with the lighting designer tomorrow morning, so we might miss your call when you wake up. But we are sending good vibes. Good vibes. They were sending good vibes. And a notary, if they had the papers, and they had the time, and they had the justification that family comes first. How far would they go? I closed my eyes and drifted into a sleep that felt less like rest and more like a surrender. I didn't know that while I slept, the wolves were not at the door. They were already inside, measuring the drapes, 3 days after I woke up to the news of my financial execution. I was discharged from the hospital. I left with a cane, a bottle of high-strength painkillers, and a plastic bag containing my personal effects. My parents did not pick me up. They had sent a text saying they were at a final tasting for the wedding cake and that the frosting on the lemon chiffon was too tart, requiring an emergency meeting with the pastry chef. They suggested I take a luxury rideshare and charge it to my credit card. I did not go to a hotel. I did not go to a friend's house. I instructed the driver to take me straight to the firm of Kruger and Associates on 17th Street. Moving was a logistical nightmare. Every bump in the road sent a shockwave through my healing incision, but the physical pain was useful. It kept me sharp. It kept me angry. When I hobbled into the elevator of the law firm, leaning heavily on my cane, I felt less like a victim and more like a plaintiff walking into a war room. Dylan Kruger met me at the reception. He was a man of sharp angles, sharp suit, sharp jaw, sharp mind. He looked at my cane and the pallor of my skin, and he did not offer pity. He simply held the door to the conference room open. "We have coffee," he said, "and we have the file." I sat down, the leather chair groaning under my weight. The conference table was mahogany, polished to a mirror shine. On it lay 2 distinct piles of documents. One was thin, one was thick. "Let us start with the crime scene," Dylan said. Sliding the thin folder toward me, I opened it. The first page was a copy of a general power of attorney. It was a terrifyingly competent forgery. The document granted Peter and Linda Harper the full authority to manage, sell, and convey real estate property on behalf of Avery Harper. It was dated 4 days before my accident. The signature at the bottom was my name. It had the loops of my A and the sharp cross of my H, to a bank teller or a hurried clerk. It looked authentic, but I looked closer. The pressure was wrong. The ink flow was too hesitant. It was a tracing. "Who notarized this?" I asked, my finger hovering over the stamp. Dylan tapped the paper. "A mobile notary service." We looked him up. He is a 22-year-old kid who does gigs for extra cash. He probably met your parents at a Starbucks. They likely showed him your scanned driver's license and gave him a sob story about their daughter being in the hospital and needing this signed urgently. He did not check the ID against the person signing. He stamped it, took his $50, and left. It is sloppy. It is illegal. But it was enough to get past the title company. I turned the page. The deed, the closing statement, the sale price, $425,000. Net proceeds after closing costs, $402,000. Wire destination, a joint checking account at First National, held by Peter and Linda Harper, the buyer. Dylan continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Is an investment group called Mountain View Assets. They flip luxury condos. I have already reached out to their legal department." "And?" I asked. "They are claiming status as a bona fide purchaser for value," Dylan said. "In legal terms, that means they bought the property in good faith. They had no reason to suspect the power of attorney was fake. They paid fair market price. They have recorded the deed. They have the keys." "Avery, so I cannot get it back?" I asked, feeling a cold weight settle in my chest. Dylan leaned back, tenting his fingers. "We can try. We can file a suit to quiet title. We can prove the forgery. But because they are an innocent third party, the court is going to be very hesitant to strip the property from them. It would take 2 years of litigation. We would be fighting a corporation with deep pockets. And in the meantime, your parents have the cash." He paused, watching my face. "If we sue to reverse the sale, your parents will have to return the money to the buyer." but they are spending it. Avery, by the time we get a judgment, that money will be gone. It will be in the caterer's bank account, the florist's pocket, and the travel agent's ledger. You will be left with a judgment against two people who are effectively insolvent. You will win a piece of paper that says they owe you $400,000, and they will file for bankruptcy. I stared at the documents. The logic was brutal. My parents had weaponized their own financial incompetence. If I fought them legally to get the condo back, I would destroy the buyer, drain my own savings on legal fees, and end up with nothing but a worthless IOU from my parents. They timed it perfectly. I whispered, "It was not luck." Dylan said. He pulled out a timeline he had sketched on a legal pad. "Look at the dates. They inquired about the notary service 3 weeks ago. They opened the joint account 2 weeks ago. They listed the condo on a private off-market network 10 days ago. They did not just sell it when you went into surgery. They had the buyer lined up and waiting. They were just waiting for you to be unconscious, so they could forge the final signature without you getting a notification on your phone." He looked me in the eye. "This is first-degree fraud. It is identity theft. It is grand larceny. I can draft the criminal complaint right now. We can have them arrested before lunch." I closed the folder. I imagined the scene. Police cars at the house in Fort Collins. My mother crying in handcuffs. My father shouting about family loyalty. Paisley screaming on Instagram about how her evil sister ruined her wedding week. If I arrest them, I said slowly, I become the villain. "Excuse me?" Dylan asked. "If I arrest them," I continued, "they will spin it. They will say they were just borrowing the money. They will say they were going to pay me back. They will tell every relative, every guest, and every person in our social circle that I sent my own elderly parents to prison over a misunderstanding. Paisley will play the victim. I will be the bitter spinster who destroyed love." Dylan nodded slowly. He understood. He knew that in the court of public opinion, facts rarely mattered as much as the narrative, and my family were masters of the narrative. "So," Dylan said, dropping his voice, "the question is not about the law. The law is on your side. The question is about the outcome. Do you want to win in a courtroom, where nobody sees you but the judge? Or do you want them to collapse in front of the very audience they are trying to impress?" I looked at him. "I want the second one." Dylan smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Then let us look at the second file." He pushed the thick folder toward me. The label read, Harper Ridge Holdings, LLC. I put my hand on the cover. This was my secret weapon. This was the nuclear code I had been sitting on for 4 years. Most people thought I was just a successful data manager. Nobody knew that I was also a landlord. Specifically, my parents' landlord. 4 years ago, my father had made a series of bad investments. He had leveraged their home, the house I grew up in, the house they were so proud of, to buy into a timeshare scheme and a failing restaurant franchise. The bank was 30 days away from foreclosing. They were going to lose everything. They had called me in a panic, begging for a loan. But I knew if I gave them cash, they would just burn it. So I made a different move. I formed an anonymous LLC called Harper Ridge Holdings. I hired Dylan to approach the bank and buy the distressed mortgage note. Then, acting as the LLC, Dylan offered my parents a deal. The company would take the title, pay off the debt, and allow them to stay in the house as renters with a standard lease agreement. My parents had no idea I was behind the company. They thought Harper Ridge Holdings was some faceless investment firm from the East Coast. They signed the lease. They paid their rent, mostly on time, to a P.O. box that forwarded to my account. I did it to save their dignity. I told Dylan I did not want them to feel like they were living in their daughter's charity. I wanted them to feel secure. "And now?" Dylan asked. I opened the file. I looked at the lease agreement. "The term is 12 months. Dylan noted. "It renews automatically unless the landlord gives notice of termination 60 days prior to the end of the term." I looked at the date. "The lease expires on May 1st. Dylan said, "Today is March 1st. We are exactly 60 days out." I did the math. May 1st, the wedding was April 25th. "If we send the notice of non-renewal today," Dylan said, "under Colorado law, they have to vacate the premises by midnight on May 1st. If they do not, we file for eviction on May 2nd. I sat back. The pain in my side flared, but it felt distant. They sold my home. I said, they sold the roof over my head because they thought I had too much and they had too little. And they are currently sleeping in a house they do not own. Dylan added, a house owned by the daughter they just robbed. He flipped to a specific page in the lease. Clause 4b. The landlord reserves the right to terminate the tenancy for any reason or no reason upon proper notice. Furthermore, any illegal activity conducted by the tenant, including but not limited to financial fraud or theft, constitutes an immediate breach of the lease terms. Dylan looked at me. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. That is poetic. I said, it is standard boilerplate. Dylan shrugged. But in this case, it is a guillotine. We can evict them for the lease expiration. Or, if we want to be aggressive, we can evict them for cause. They used the address of the rental property on the fraudulent notary documents. They committed a felony inside the dwelling. I shook my head. No, not for cause. That requires a hearing. That gives them a chance to argue. I want the non-renewal. It is clean. It is absolute. They just have to leave. Dylan pulled out a drafted letter. It was simple. It was on the letterhead of Harper Ridge Holdings. It stated that the owner was reclaiming the property for personal use and that the tenancy would terminate on May 1st. Do you want me to mail this? Dylan asked. I looked at the letter. If they received this now, they would panic. They would scramble. They might even dip into the stolen money to find a new place, wasting more of what I needed to recover. No, I said. Dylan raised an eyebrow. No, do not mail it. I said, serve it, but not today. When? I thought about the wedding. I thought about the rehearsal dinner. I thought about the speeches my father was planning to make about family values. They are convinced I am weak. I said, they think I'm going to roll over. If I serve them now, I show my hand. I want them to spend every dollar on that wedding. I want them to stand up in front of 200 people and pretend they are royalty. I tapped the table. Serve them at the rehearsal dinner? Dylan suggested, a glint in his eye. No, I said, that is too messy. I want to give them the illusion of safety until the very last second. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Get the papers ready, I said. Get the affidavit from the hospital proving I was unconscious. Get the forensic analysis of the forged signature, and get the deed to the Fort Collins house proving Harper Ridge Holdings is me. I am going to attend the wedding. Dylan, I am going to sit in the back. I am going to watch my sister walk down the aisle on my money. And then, I said, I am going to give a toast. Dylan smiled. He closed the folder. You know, he said, most clients in your position just want their money back. You are the first one who seems to understand that money is temporary, but humiliation is forever. I stood up, gripping my cane. They took my home, Dylan. They did not just sell walls and a floor. They sold my sanctuary. They sold the one place where I was safe from them. I looked at the file one last time. They want a house? They can have a house. They can have the dollhouse Paisley is building. But the real world? The real world belongs to the person who holds the deed. I walked to the door. Wait for my signal, I said. Dylan nodded. I will be ready. I walked out of the office and into the cold March wind. My leg hurt. My bank account was empty, but for the first time since I woke up in that recovery room, I did not feel helpless. I felt like the landlord, and rent was due. Silence is usually quiet, but in the digital age, silence screams. I had not spoken a single word to my family since the day I left the hospital. I had not sent a text. I had not answered a call. I had not filed a lawsuit. Yet, I was simply existing in my temporary rental, nursing my surgical wounds and waiting for Dylan to assemble the legal guillotine. But my silence was apparently aggressive. It started on a Thursday evening, 4 days after I hired Dylan. I was sitting on my couch, organizing my medication, when my phone lit up. It was not a call. It was a notification from Instagram. Paisley Harper mentioned you in their story. My stomach tightened. I tapped the notification. The screen filled with Paisley's face. She was in a bridal salon, surrounded by walls of white tulle and lace. The lighting was soft, flattering, clearly filtered to enhance her tear-filled eyes. She looked devastatingly beautiful and heartbreakingly fragile. "Hey guys," she whispered to the camera, wiping away a perfectly placed tear. "I know I have been quiet today. I am going through a lot. You think wedding planning is all joy, but sometimes the people who are supposed to support you the most are the ones who try to tear you down." She sniffed, looking away from the camera for dramatic effect. "I have a family member," she continued, her voice trembling, "who is threatening to ruin everything. Just because they are unhappy with their own life, they want to destroy mine. It is so hard when you want to include everyone, but some people just have so much toxic energy. I am trying to stay positive for Caleb, but it hurts. Send good vibes, please. We are dealing with some legal bullying right now." The video ended with a black screen and a small text caption. "Family isn't always blood. It's who shows up." I sat there, frozen. I had not threatened her. I had not told her I was suing. I had not even told them I knew about the lease termination. The only thing I had done was stop answering the phone. But Paisley was smart. She knew what they had done to me was illegal. She knew a blowback was inevitable. So she was launching a preemptive strike. She was controlling the narrative before I even opened my mouth. By painting herself as the victim of a jealous and litigious family member, she was inoculating our entire social circle against the truth. If I spoke up now, I would just be proving her right. I would be the angry, bitter sister attacking the blushing bride. The reaction was instantaneous. Within 10 minutes, the messages began to arrive. They came from cousins I had not seen in 5 years. They came from my mother's bridge club friends. They came from aunts who still sent me $5 checks for my birthday. "Avery, I saw Paisley's story. I hope you are not making this about you. She deserves her day. Why are you so jealous of your sister? You have a career. Let her have this. Family suing family? Really? Avery? That is low. Even for you. Your mom is worried sick. Stop the drama and call them." I did not reply to a single one. Instead, I took a screenshot. I captured the timestamp. I captured the sender's name. I captured the content. I opened a folder on my laptop titled Evidence, Harassment, and dragged the images inside. They wanted a fight. They wanted me to explode, to type back angry paragraphs defending myself, to scream, "They stole $400,000 from me," so they could screenshot my rage and say, "See? She is unstable." I would not give them the satisfaction. I was a risk manager. I knew that in a crisis, data was more valuable than dialogue. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Aunt Diane. Diane was my father's younger sister. She had always positioned herself as the reasonable one, the peacemaker of the Harper clan. She liked to say there were 3 sides to every story: yours, theirs, and the truth. I debated ignoring it, but Dylan had advised me to take a few calls. "We need to know what they are saying about you." He had said, "Let them talk." I answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello, Aunt Diane." "Avery," she sighed, her voice dripping with disappointed benevolence. "I am glad you picked up. Your father is a wreck." I said nothing. "Listen," she continued, "I know you and your parents have had your differences. I know you are independent, but honey, threatening legal action? Right before the wedding? It is a bit extreme, don't you think?" I looked at the wall. My pain medication was wearing off, leaving a dull ache in my abdomen. "Aunt Diane," I said, keeping my voice flat, "did they tell you what they did?" "They told me there was a misunderstanding about some funds," she said smoothly. "They said they liquidated an asset to help with cash flow, and they intended to pay you back with interest after the wedding. They said they acted as your proxy because you were incapacitated. They were trying to help. Avery, they didn't want you to worry about the market crashing." I almost laughed. The market crashing? The Denver real estate market was hotter than it had ever been. They sold my condo. "Diane," I said, "they forged my signature on a deed while I was under general anesthesia. They took $425,000 and spent it on flowers and a venue. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a felony. There was a pause. I waited for the shock. I waited for her to say, "Oh my God." I had no idea. Instead, she made a tutting sound. "Well, Avery, that is one way to look at it. But you have to understand their perspective. They are under a lot of pressure. And you know, they raised you. They paid for your braces. They paid for your swim lessons. We all make sacrifices for family. Is a condo really worth destroying your relationship with your parents? It is just bricks and mortar. You can always buy another one. You make so much money." The breath left my lungs. It wasn't that she didn't believe me. It was that she didn't care. To her, and to the rest of them, my role was to provide. If my parents took from me, it was simply a retroactive tax for my upbringing. I recorded the call. "Aunt Diane," I said, "thank you for confirming they admitted to the liquidation." "Avery, wait," she started, her voice rising in panic. I hung up. I saved the recording. I renamed the file. Diane, admission of motive. I was shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer, icy realization of how deep the rot went. They had successfully convinced themselves that robbing me was a moral act. I needed water. I stood up, gripping my cane, and made my way to the small kitchenette of the rental. As I poured a glass, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email alert, but it wasn't from a social media platform. It was from my credit monitoring service. Identity Guard. Urgent alert. New credit inquiry detected. I tapped the app open. Institution. American Express Platinum. Status. Declined. Reason. Credit file frozen by consumer. I stared at the screen. The inquiry had been made 5 minutes ago. They were trying to open a credit card in my name. My parents, or perhaps Paisley, had hit a wall with the cash. Maybe the $400,000 was already allocated. Maybe they needed more for the honeymoon. So they had gone for the next available resource. My credit score. They had my social security number. They had my date of birth. They had my old address. They assumed that because I was in recovery, I would be too distracted to notice, but they didn't know that 4 years ago. Right after I bought the condo, I had frozen my credit at all 3 bureaus. It was a standard precaution I recommended to all my clients at Redwood Arc Systems. I called Dylan immediately. They just tried to open an Amex. I said, "I see it." Dylan replied. He sounded awake, alert. "I have a paralegal monitoring your file in real time. We got the ping too. They are desperate." I said, "They are entitled." Dylan corrected. "There is a difference. Desperate people steal bread. Entitled people steal platinum cards because they believe they deserve the points. Avery, I want you to look at something. Check your secure email." I opened my laptop. There was a message from Dylan with an attachment. "We ran a forensic trace on the documents your parents used for the sale." Dylan said, "And we cross-referenced it with the data breach on your email. We found a folder in your father's cloud drive. Don't ask me how we got it. Let us just say we have a very good digital investigator." I opened the attachment. It was a PDF containing a series of scanned images. There was my driver's license, not the current one, but the one I had renewed last year. There was my social security card. There were 3 pages of a notebook where someone had practiced my signature over and over again. Avery Harper, Avery Harper, Avery Harper. The handwriting started out shaky and got progressively smoother. The metadata on the scan says these were created 3 months ago. Dylan said, 3 months ago, long before my accident, long before the surgery. They didn't sell the condo because of an emergency. I whispered, they were planning to steal my identity way before I got hit by that truck. The accident just gave them the window. Dylan said, if you hadn't been in the hospital, they would have found another way. Maybe they would have waited until you went on a business trip. Maybe they would have forged a power of attorney and claimed you were out of the country. This was a premeditated extraction of assets. I felt sick. This wasn't a family drama. This was a long con. They are predators, I said, and you are the prey. Dylan agreed. But now you are a prey with a lawyer. Keep the freeze on your credit. Document the attempt. It goes into the pile. I hung up and sat in the dark. I felt a sudden, desperate need to see someone who wasn't related to me, someone who wasn't trying to rob me. And then, as if summoned by the universe's twisted sense of humor, my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. It was Caleb Sterling, the groom. He was standing on the porch of my rental, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked like a man who had walked into a room and realized he was vastly underdressed. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a paper bag from a high-end bakery. I hesitated. Caleb was innocent in this. As far as I knew, he came from a family of old money, the kind of people who had buildings named after them in Denver, who valued honor and reputation above all else. He was kind, soft-spoken, and utterly infatuated with Paisley. I unlocked the door and opened it. "Avery," he said, his face lighting up with genuine relief. "I am so glad you are okay. I mean, I know you are recovering, but I just wanted to see for myself." He held up the bag. "I brought croissants. From that place on Larimer you like. Paisley mentioned once it was your favorite." Paisley had never mentioned anything about my preferences to anyone. Caleb had likely remembered it himself from some passing comment I made years ago. "Come in, Caleb," I said, stepping back to let him pass. He walked into the small living room, looking around at the temporary furniture, the boxes of medical supplies. He seemed uncomfortable. I saw Paisley's story," he said, sitting on the edge of the armchair. "I wanted to apologize. I told her she shouldn't have posted it. She is very stressed. The wedding planning is getting to her. She is accusing me of ruining her happiness." "Caleb," I said, sitting opposite him. "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "And I know it is not true." I told her. "Avery is the most responsible person I know. I do not know what this dispute is about, Avery, and I do not want to pry. Money makes people crazy, but I just want you to know that I value you as a sister-in-law. I want you there." He was so sincere. It broke my heart. He had no idea he was marrying a sinkhole. "Thank you, Caleb," I said. "That means a lot." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Honestly, it has been a weird few months. I feel like everyone is on edge. I have been feeling a bit exposed lately." "Exposed?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, laughing nervously. "It sounds paranoid, but ever since I lost my laptop, I have been double-checking everything." I froze. "You lost your laptop?" I asked casually. "Yeah, about 4 months ago." He said, "It was the strangest thing. I stayed over at Paisley's apartment. Your parents were in town, so it was a full house. I left my MacBook in the living room charging. The next morning, it was just gone. No sign of a break-in. Your dad said maybe I left it in my car, but I know I brought it inside." My blood ran cold. 4 months ago, 1 month before they scanned my documents. "Did you have financial information on it?" I asked. "Everything." Caleb sighed. "Bank logins, trust fund access, tax returns. I had to change all my passwords. It was a nightmare. But nothing was stolen from the accounts, so I guess whoever took it just wiped it and sold the hardware." He smiled, oblivious. "Anyway, that is boring tech stuff. I just wanted to check on you." I looked at him. He wasn't just the groom, he was the beta test. They had stolen his laptop to see if they could crack his accounts. When they couldn't, probably because his family's trust fund had military-grade security protocols, they moved on to the softer target, me. They didn't just want Paisley to marry rich. They needed her to marry rich because they were running out of people to steal from. Caleb was the whale, and I was just the chum they threw in the water to keep the sharks busy until the wedding. I looked at Caleb's kind, trusting face. He thought he was marrying into a quirky, loving family. He didn't know he was marrying a criminal enterprise. "You should change your passwords again." "Caleb," I said softly, "just to be safe." He laughed. "You sound like your dad. He keeps telling me to be careful with my data." I gripped my cane until my hand cramped. My father. the man who had likely pawned Caleb's laptop or handed it to the same hacker who cracked my email. "I am going to the wedding." "Caleb," I said. He smiled. "I am so glad. It wouldn't be the same without you." He left 10 minutes later. I locked the door. I went back to my computer. I opened the folder titled Evidence. I created a new subfolder, Caleb Sterling, Laptop Theft. I typed a note to Dylan. Add Caleb's missing laptop to the timeline. 4 months ago. Location, Paisley's apartment. Suspects, Peter and Linda Harper. Motive, testing the waters. I stared at the screen. Paisley wasn't just a brat. She was the bait, and my parents were the trappers. They thought they had isolated me. They thought the Instagram story and the flying monkeys would shame me into silence, but they had made a fatal error. They had let the groom talk to me. I wasn't the evil sister. I was the witness. And on April 25th, I was going to take the stand. The rehearsal dinner was held at a steakhouse in Vail that smelled of truffle oil, aged leather, and old money. It was the kind of place where the menu did not list prices. Because if you had to ask, you were in the wrong tax bracket. The lighting was dim, designed to make diamonds sparkle and wrinkles vanish. I arrived 15 minutes late. This was calculated. I wanted the initial flurry of greetings to be over. I wanted to walk in when everyone was seated, when the noise had settled into a dull roar of polite conversation, so that the thump step of my cane would be audible against the hardwood floors. I wore a black dress. It was simple, high-necked, and long-sleeved. It was not a morning dress, but it certainly wasn't a celebration dress. It was a boardroom dress. It was the dress of a woman who had come to close a deal, not to toast a bride. The hostess, a young woman with a headset who looked terrified of making a mistake, scanned the seating chart. "Name?" she asked. "Avery Harper." I said. She frowned, running her finger down the list of the head table, then the second table, then the third. Her finger stopped at a small round table near the kitchen doors. "Oh, here you are," she said, her voice dropping a little. "Table 19. I looked at table 19. It was occupied by the wedding photographer's assistant, a second cousin I hadn't seen since I was 12, and the unattached +1 of a groomsman who had gotten stuck in traffic. They had put the sister of the bride at the vendor table. It was a petty, tactical insult. It was meant to minimize me, to show me that in the hierarchy of this event, I was an afterthought. But as I walked through the room, navigating the narrow spaces between the chairs, I didn't feel minimized. I felt invisible. And invisibility is a superpower when you are gathering intelligence. My mother saw me first. She was holding a glass of champagne, laughing at something Caleb's mother was saying. When her eyes landed on me, the laugh died in her throat. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stiffened, her hand tightening around the stem of her glass. I reached table 19 and pulled out a chair. The photographer's assistant gave me a sympathetic smile, eyeing my cane. "Rough skiing accident?" he asked. "Something like that." I said, "I was hit by a truck." He laughed, thinking I was speaking metaphorically. I sat down and surveyed the room. The decor was aggressive in its luxury. There were centerpieces made of white birch branches and white roses, imported, doubtless part of the $18,000 floral budget I had refused to pay for. The tablecloths were heavy linen. The wine was flowing like water. I did the math in my head. The venue buyout was likely $20,000. The food and drink, for 80 people, was probably another $15,000, $35,000. That was the down payment I had put on my condo 4 years ago. Tonight, my family was literally eating my home. My father was at the head table, holding court. He looked flushed, happy, the picture of a proud patriarch. He was wearing a tuxedo that I suspected was new. When his eyes swept the room and caught mine, he didn't hold the gaze. He looked effectively through me, focusing on a waiter refilling water glasses behind my head. It was the flinch of a man who knew he was guilty but had convinced himself the crime was victimless. Caleb was the only one who seemed truly aware of my presence. He was seated next to Paisley, who was glowing in a white cocktail dress that probably cost more than my first semester of college. Caleb looked across the room at me. He didn't smile. He looked concerned. He looked at my cane, then at his wife-to-be, then back at me. He was starting to see the cracks in the porcelain. I ordered an iced tea. I didn't drink alcohol. I needed to be sharp. The appetizers arrived. Scallops wrapped in bacon, Wagyu beef sliders. I ate mechanically. Then came the speeches. My father stood up. He tapped a spoon against his glass. The room fell silent. He adjusted his bow tie, beaming at the crowd. "Welcome show. Everyone," he boomed. His voice was rich, practiced. "It is so wonderful to see all of you here in Vale to celebrate Paisley and Caleb. You know, raising daughters is not easy." There was a polite ripple of laughter. "It requires patience," he continued. "It requires love. And above all, it requires sacrifice." I put my glass down on the table. The word hung in the air. Sacrifice. "We parents do whatever we can to launch our children into the world," my father said, placing a hand on his chest. "We give them roots, and we give them wings, and sometimes we give them everything we have, literally, to make sure they are happy. Because that is what family is. It is a shared pot. It is a bond that says, 'What is mine is yours.'" He raised his glass toward Paisley. "To Paisley, you deserve the world. And I am so happy we could give you this perfect start." The room applauded. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Paisley looked radiant, blowing a kiss to her daddy. At table 19, I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded in my lap. "What is mine is yours." He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was confessing. He was telling the room exactly how he justified the theft. In his mind, my bank account was the shared pot. The fact that I had earned it, saved it, and signed the legal documents for it was irrelevant. I was his daughter. Therefore, I was his asset. The applause died down. The main course was served. Filet mignon. I cut into the meat. It was tender, cooked to a perfect medium rare. It tasted like ash. Halfway through the meal, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I didn't flinch. I knew that perfume. It was Chanel Mademoiselle, but applied too heavily. I turned. Paisley was standing there. She wasn't smiling. "Can I talk to you for a second?" she hissed. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin. Of course. She didn't wait for me to grab my cane. She marched toward the back of the restaurant, near the restrooms, expecting me to follow. I took my time. Thump step, thump step. I let the sound interrupt the conversation at the nearby tables. When I reached the alcove, Paisley turned on me. Her face was flushed, her eyes hard. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "I was invited." I said calmly, "You are sitting at the vendor table with a face like a funeral." She snapped. "You are freaking everyone out. Mom is shaking. Dad is on his third scotch. Are you trying to make a scene?" "I haven't said a word." "Paisley, that is the problem," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You are just staring. It is creepy. Look, I know you are mad about the condo. I get it. It sucks. But can you not just be happy for me for one weekend? Can you not just let it go?" I looked at her. She really believed it. She believed that letting it go was a reasonable request for grand larceny. "You sold my house. Paisley," I said softly. "We did what we had to do," she said, her voice rising before she caught herself and lowered it again. "You were not using it. You were practically living at the office, and Dad said he would pay you back eventually. Why do you have to be so materialistic? It is just money. This is my wedding. This is my life. Materialistic." The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. She was standing in a $500 venue, wearing diamonds, angry that I was upset about the theft of my life savings, and she called me materialistic. I reached into my small clutch purse. "I have a gift for you," I said. Paisley recoiled slightly, as if she expected me to pull out a weapon. "What is it?" she asked suspiciously. I pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp. "I was going to give this to you tomorrow." I said, "But since we are talking now, I thought you might want a preview." She snatched the envelope from my hand. She ripped it open. Inside was a single index card. On it, I had written 4 words in my best calligraphy. "The full accounting follows." She stared at the card. She flipped it over. It was blank on the back. "What does this mean?" she asked, looking up at me. "Is this some kind of threat?" "It is a promise," I said. She crumpled the card in her hand. "You are psychotic. You are actually jealous. You cannot stand that I am happy." I leaned in. I was close enough to see the heavy foundation filling the pores of her nose. "I am not jealous. Paisley, I am efficient. Enjoy the steak. It cost $400 a plate. I know, because I paid for it." I turned around and walked away. I didn't go back to the table. I walked straight to the exit. As I passed the main table, I saw Caleb watching me. He wasn't eating. He was looking at Paisley, who was storming back to her seat with a crumpled index card in her fist. He looked at her face, contorted with rage and fear, and then he looked at me. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a warning. "Brace yourself." I retrieved my coat from the check stand. The cold mountain air hit me like a slap outside. It was snowing lightly. I pulled out my phone. I had a text from Dylan. "All set for tomorrow. The title specialist is flying in from Denver in the morning. I will be at the ceremony as a guest. We have the files. Sleep well." I didn't reply immediately. I opened my smart home app. I had set a custom alert on the security system of the Fort Collins house, the house my parents lived in, the house Harper Ridge Holdings owned. I had set it to record audio clips whenever the keywords Avery or lawyer or Sue were spoken in the kitchen. There was a new clip. It was time-stamped from yesterday morning. Right before they left for Vail, I pressed play. I held the phone up to my ear. Standing in the snow outside the steakhouse, the audio was clear. The hum of the refrigerator was in the background. Voice of Mom. "Did you bring the folder? The one with the bank transfer records?" Voice of Dad. "I left it in the safe. Why would I bring it?" Voice of Mom. "What if she tries something while we are gone?" She has been so quiet. Peter, it is unnatural. What if she has a lawyer? There was the sound of a zipper closing. Suitcase packing. Voice of Dad. "Linda, stop it. She does not have the stomach for it." I raised her. She is a rule follower. She is not going to sue her own parents. It would destroy her reputation. She is just sulking. Voice of Mom. "I don't know. The way she looked at me in the hospital." Voice of Dad. "She will get over it. We will invite her to Sunday dinner when we get back. We will make her favorite roast. She always folds when we play the family card. She wouldn't dare take us to court. She knows it would kill you." The clip ended. She wouldn't dare. I lowered the phone. The snow was falling harder now, dusting the shoulders of my black coat. They were banking on my love for them. That was their insurance policy. They calculated that I loved them more than I respected myself. They calculated that I would absorb a $500,000 blow just to keep the peace. They were right about the old Avery. The old Avery would have cried. The old Avery would have come to Sunday dinner and eaten the roast and accepted a vague promise of repayment that would never come. But the old Avery died on an operating table 7 weeks ago. The woman standing in the snow was someone else. I texted Dylan back. "I am awake. See you at the church." I walked to the waiting car service. I didn't look back at the warm glow of the steakhouse windows. I didn't care about the dinner anymore. Tomorrow wasn't a wedding. It was an audit, and I was the auditor. The ceremony was a masterclass in purchased perfection. The $18,000 worth of hydrangeas formed a literal tunnel of white blooms that shielded the guests from the harsh mountain wind. The aisle was lined with lanterns that glowed with the soft, flattering amber light of expensive candles. A string quartet played a hauntingly beautiful rendition of a modern pop song, transforming a radio hit into a symphony of elegance. I sat in the third row. I had been demoted from the front row, a change made to the seating chart presumably 5 minutes before the music started. My view was partially obstructed by a large floral arrangement, but I could see them clearly enough. Paisley looked like a princess. There was no other word for it. Her dress was a cloud of silk and lace, fitted to perfection, trailing behind her like a royal decree. She walked down the aisle with her chin held high, her eyes misty, clutching a bouquet of peonies that had been flown in from Holland. My father walked her down. He looked distinguished in his tuxedo, his chest puffed out, his face arranged in a mask of benevolent pride. He was playing the role of the generous provider, the man who had moved mountains to give his little girl this day. I watched them. I watched the way he patted her hand. I watched the way she looked up at him with adoration. It was a beautiful scene. It was also a lie. Every step they took was paved with my equity. Every flower was watered with my stolen security. When the officiant reached the part of the ceremony that everyone dreads in a situation like this, if anyone here present knows of any just cause why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence that fell over the mountain clearing was heavy. I felt eyes on the back of my neck. I felt the collective intake of breath from the cousins who had seen Paisley's Instagram story. From the aunts who had sent me recriminating texts. They were waiting for the jealous sister to stand up. They were waiting for the scene. They were waiting for me to scream. I did not move. I did not blink. I kept my hands folded in my lap, staring straight ahead at the officiant's shoes, in the front row. I saw Paisley's shoulders tense. She was waiting for it too. When 5 seconds passed, then 10, and I remained seated, I saw her shoulders drop. I saw a small, triumphant smile touch the corner of her mouth. She thought she had won. She thought her social media campaign had worked. She thought I had been cowed into submission by the pressure of family. The ceremony concluded. They kissed. The guests cheered. Rice was thrown. The happy couple walked back up the aisle, beaming, while the quartet played a joyous recessional. I waited until the last guest had filed out before I stood up. Dylan was waiting for me by the exit. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars. Blending in perfectly with the high society crowd, he carried a leather attaché case. He looked at me and nodded once. "It is time," he said. I checked my watch. The reception was starting in the grand ballroom. The ballroom was even more opulent than the ceremony. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. The tables were set with gold-rimmed chargers and crystal glassware. There was an open bar that stretched 20 feet long, stocked with top-shelf liquor. I found my seat, still at table 19, the vendor table, and sat down. The room was buzzing with adrenaline and champagne. Everyone was high on the beauty of the event. Dinner was served. Speeches were made. The best man told a funny story about Caleb in college. The maid of honor cried while recounting how Paisley had always dreamed of this day. Then, my father took the microphone. He was drunk, not stumbling drunk, but expansive drunk, the kind of drunk that makes a narcissist feel invincible. He stood in the center of the dance floor, basking in the spotlight. He thanked the guests. He thanked the staff. He thanked the Sterling family. And then, he made a mistake. He looked at me. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the relief that I hadn't objected during the ceremony. Maybe he genuinely believed his own delusion that we were all in this together. And I want to give a special mention to my other daughter. "Avery," he said, gesturing toward the back of the room. The spotlight swung around, blinding me for a second. The room went quiet. "Avery has been through a lot lately," he continued, his voice thick with performative emotion. "A bad accident, a long recovery, but she is here today. And you know, Avery has always been the quiet strength of this family. She made a significant contribution to ensure this weekend was possible. She might be sitting in the back, but she is front and center in our hearts. Avery, stand up." He started clapping. The guests, taking their cue, started clapping politely. My mother, sitting at the head table, looked horrified. She was shaking her head slightly, trying to signal him to stop. But he was on a roll. "Come up here, Avery," he shouted jovially. "Come say a few words to your sister." The room turned to look at me. This was not in the plan. I had intended to wait until the cake cutting, but my father, in his arrogance, had just handed me the microphone. He wanted to parade me as the supportive sister. He wanted to use my presence to validate his theft. I stood up. I grabbed my cane. I walked toward the dance floor. The clicking of my cane on the parquet floor was the only sound in the room as the applause died down. I reached the center of the floor. My father smiled, his eyes glassy, and tried to hand me the mic. "Love you, honey," he whispered off mic, a stench of scotch on his breath. "Keep it short." I took the microphone. It felt heavy and cool in my hand. I looked at Paisley. She was staring at me, her glass of champagne frozen halfway to her mouth. She looked terrified. I looked at the crowd. 220 faces, Caleb's wealthy relatives, Paisley's influencer friends, my own family. I took a breath. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of a sister. It was the voice of a senior data risk manager presenting a catastrophic failure report. "Thank you, Dad," I said. The speakers amplified my voice, filling every corner of the ballroom. "You are right," I continued. "I did make a significant contribution to this wedding." I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. I contributed exactly $425,000. A ripple went through the room, a nervous laughter. People thought it was a joke, a specific, odd joke, but I did not smile. My father's smile faltered. He took a half step toward me, reaching for the mic. "Avery," he started. I stepped back, raising the cane between us like a barrier. 7 weeks ago," I said, keeping my eyes on the crowd. "I was in a car accident. I suffered severe internal bleeding and spinal damage. I was taken to Denver Health for emergency surgery. The surgery lasted 6 hours. The room was dead silent now. The nervous laughter had evaporated. While I was on the operating table, unconscious and under general anesthesia, my parents, Peter and Linda Harper, entered my apartment. They took my personal documents. They forged my signature on a power of attorney, and they used that forged document to sell my home, my condo in Denver, to a cash buyer. I heard a gasp from the Sterling side of the room. Caleb's mother put a hand to her mouth. My father lunged for me. "That is a lie," he shouted. "She is on medication. She is crazy. Cut the mic." But the sound guy was confused. He didn't cut it. I did not flinch. I reached into the oversized pocket of my dress and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. I unfolded them. I held them up to the light. "This is the power of attorney," I said, my voice steady, cutting through my father's shouting. "Dated January 30th. The timestamp on the notary seal is 10:15 in the morning. At 10:15 in the morning, I was intubated in operating room 4. Here is the hospital record confirming my status." I dropped the paper to the floor and held up the next one. "This is the forensic analysis of the signature," I said. "Confirmed forgery. And this is the wire transfer record. $402,000. Net proceeds. Transferred directly into a joint account held by Peter and Linda Harper." I looked at Paisley. She had gone pale, her makeup standing out in stark relief against her white skin. "That money paid for these flowers," I said, gesturing to the centerpieces. "It paid for this venue. It paid for that dress. You are not looking at a wedding. You are looking at a crime scene." My mother stood up, screaming, "You ungrateful brat! We did this for the family. How dare you?" I turned to Dylan, who was standing by the edge of the dance floor. "Dylan?" I said. Dylan Kruger stepped into the light. He walked with the confidence of a man who owned the law. He didn't need a microphone. He projected his voice like a weapon. "I am Dylan Kruger, attorney at law, representing Ms. Avery Harper." He placed his briefcase on the nearest table and snapped the latches open. The sound was like a gunshot. "We have filed a police report this morning with the Denver District Attorney's Office for first-degree forgery, identity theft, and grand larceny. The officers are waiting outside the venue to collect statements, but out of respect for the groom's family, we asked them to wait until the dinner was concluded." He pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents and held them up. "These are the affidavits. The trail is undeniable. The money was traced from the sale of the condo directly to the vendors in this room." He looked at the crowd. "If you are a vendor here tonight, and you were paid in the last 6 weeks by Peter or Linda Harper, you are currently in possession of stolen funds. Those funds are subject to clawback by the court. The room erupted. People were standing up. Phones were out, recording everything. The videographer, who had been hired to capture a fairy tale, was now filming a documentary. My father was purple with rage. He looked ready to strike me. "You ruined it," he screamed. "You ruined everything. You selfish, jealous." I held up a hand. "I wasn't done. I am not finished," I said. I looked at my parents. They were standing there, exposed, stripped of their benevolent masks. They looked small. They looked like thieves. "You took my home," I said to them. "You sold the roof over my head because you thought I wouldn't fight back. You thought I was weak. You thought that because I was your daughter, I would let you cannibalize my life to feed your ego." I reached into my pocket again. I pulled out the second envelope, the one I had prepared for this exact moment. "So I have a second wedding gift," I said. I walked over to the head table. I placed the envelope on the white tablecloth, right in front of my father's empty plate. "For 4 years, you have been renting your home in Fort Collins from a company called Harper Ridge Holdings, LLC. You thought it was an investment firm." I leaned in closer to the microphone. "It is not a firm. It is me." My mother's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She whispered, "No, that is impossible. I bought your debt 4 years ago to save you from foreclosure." I said, "I set up the LLC to protect your pride. I have been your landlord for 48 months. I tapped the envelope. "That is a notice of non-renewal of lease and a notice of eviction for cause. You committed a felony on the premises. You used that house to forge my documents. That violates Clause 4B of your rental agreement." I straightened up. I looked at Paisley. She was crying now. Ugly, mascara-stained tears. Caleb was staring at her with a look of absolute horror, as if he was seeing a stranger. "You have 30 days to vacate," I said. I looked at my father. He had collapsed back into his chair, looking like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "You wanted to sell a house?" I asked him. "Congratulations. You just lost 2. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud that echoed through the ballroom. I turned around. I grabbed my cane. I walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one said a word. The only sound was the weeping of the bride and the frantic whispers of 200 witnesses who had just watched a family dynasty disintegrate in 3 minutes. I walked past Caleb. He didn't look at me. He was looking at his wife, and he was taking off his ring. The silence that followed the impact of the microphone hitting the floor did not last. It was a vacuum, a brief hesitation in the universe, before the air rushed back in with the force of a hurricane. It started with a murmur, a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the floorboards of the ballroom. Then came the screens. It was a synchronized movement, terrifying in its efficiency. 220 guests reached into their pockets and purses. 220 screens lit up the dim, romantic lighting of the room like fireflies. They were not texting, they were recording. I had not asked for a spectacle. I had not asked for a viral moment. But when you starve a crowd of authenticity for 3 hours with fake vows and rented flowers, and then feed them a raw, bloody slab of truth, they devour it. The story Paisley had carefully curated. The fairy tale. The doting father. The jealous sister. Shattered instantly. The shards of that narrative were now being live-streamed to every social circle in Colorado. My father was the first to break the paralysis. He did not look at me. He looked at the phones. He saw his reputation dissolving in real time. Panic stripped away the last of his suave. Father of the bride persona, leaving behind a cornered animal. "She is lying," he shouted. His voice cracked, a desperate, guttural sound that carried without amplification. "She is on heavy painkillers. She has been hallucinating since the surgery. Do not listen to her. It is a delusion." He looked wildly around the room, seeking an ally. He locked eyes with his boss, a man sitting at table 4. "It is not true. Jim, you know me. You know I would never—" Dylan Kruger did not let him finish. He did not shout. He did not step onto the dance floor. He simply stood by the table where he had opened his briefcase, his posture relaxed, his voice projecting with the cool authority of a man who reads statutes for fun. "The records are public. Mr. Harper." Dylan held up his own phone, the screen facing the nearest table. "I have the Denver County Assessor's portal open right now. Anyone with a smartphone can verify this in 30 seconds. Search for Avery Harper. Search for the transaction dated January 30th. Then search for the notary commission number. It is not a delusion. It is a digital footprint." A man at table 6, Caleb's cousin, an investment banker with a sharp face, was already typing. He frowned, tapped his screen, and then looked up. His eyes met my father's. "It is here," the cousin said. His voice was not loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the ballroom. It cut like a knife. "Sale recorded January 30th. Grantor. Avery Harper. Grantee. Mountain View Assets." He looked at the timeline I had distributed. "And here's the transfer. The title company is listed. It matches the paperwork she threw on the floor." The confirmation was the spark. The room exploded into chaos. It was not the chaos of a brawl, but the chaos of judgment. The whispers turned into gasps. The Sterling family, seated at the front tables near the dance floor, recoiled physically. They leaned away from my parents as if fraud was a contagious disease. My mother tried to salvage the unsalvageable. She grabbed Paisley's hand, her grip visible even from a distance. "Paisley, honey, tell them. Tell them we did this for the family. Tell them Avery gave us permission verbally, and she is just forgetting." Paisley looked at her mother. Then she looked at the guests. She saw the phones. She saw the disgust on the faces of her bridesmaids. The carefully constructed mask of the victim began to melt, revealing the terrified, selfish girl underneath. She realized that playing the victim only worked when the villain was vague, when the villain was a stack of bank records. The victim narrative collapsed. Caleb Sterling stood up. He moved slowly, like a man waking up from a deep, drugged sleep. He looked at the white tablecloth. He looked at the centerpieces that had cost $18,000, money that belonged to the woman standing 20 feet away with a cane. He turned to his bride. "Paisley." His voice was quiet, but Paisley flinched as if he had screamed. "Caleb, please," she sobbed, reaching for his lapel. Her tears were flowing freely now, destroying her professional makeup, but no one was rushing to comfort her. "It is complicated. You do not understand the pressure we were under. We just wanted it to be perfect." Caleb took a step back. He brushed her hand away from his tuxedo jacket. "Did you know?" he asked. It was a simple question. 3 words. Paisley froze. Her eyes darted to her parents, then back to Caleb. This was the moment. This was the chance to save her soul. If not her marriage, she could have said she was innocent. She could have said she had no idea. But Paisley was not smart enough to lie about the past. Only the present. "We needed the deposit," she whimpered, her voice rising in a whine. "Avery wasn't using the condo." "Caleb, she has so much money. She barely spends it. We were going to pay her back after the wedding gifts came in. It was a loan." The admission hung in the air, toxic and absolute. She didn't deny the theft. She justified the target. Caleb looked at her. For the first time, I saw the exact moment love dies. It doesn't fade. It snaps. It snapped when he realized that the laptop theft 4 months ago, the one that had terrified him, was likely a trial run for the woman standing in front of him. "You stole $400,000 from your sister," Caleb said. He looked at the expensive watch on his wrist, a gift from Paisley. He looked at the band playing softly in the corner. "Paid for with my savings. You stole it to impress people you do not even like." "Caleb!" my father shouted, trying to intervene. "Do not use that word. It was a family allocation of resources." Eleanor Sterling stood up. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, wearing a navy gown that cost more than my car. She was the matriarch of the Sterling family, a woman who controlled a philanthropic empire and whose approval was the currency Paisley had been desperate to hoard. She did not look at Paisley. She did not look at my father. She walked around the table and stood next to her son. "Caleb," she said. Her voice was ice. "Come with me. Mrs. Sterling, please," my mother cried out. Stepping forward, "Let us go to the bridal suite. We can explain. There are always two sides. There are not two sides to a felony." "Linda," Eleanor said. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her tone suggested that speaking to my mother was a breach of protocol she would soon regret. She turned to my parents. "I would like a private meeting with you, your daughter, and your legal representation immediately following this event. My family will be vacating the premises. We will expect a full accounting of every cent of sterling money that has been commingled with these illicit funds." She looked at Paisley. She didn't look at her with anger. She looked at her with the polite detachment one reserves for a server who has spilled soup. "I am very disappointed," she said. That was it. That was the death knell. Eleanor took Caleb's arm. Caleb didn't resist. He looked at Paisley one last time. There was no longing in his eyes. There was only the horrified realization that he had almost signed a contract with a parasite. He turned his back on her. Paisley screamed. It wasn't a pretty, cinematic scream. It was a raw, ugly sound of entitlement being denied. "You are ruining my day," she shrieked, stamping her foot in her custom designer heels. "Caleb, come back here. Mom, do something. Avery is ruining everything." My father, seeing the sterling fortune walking out the door, turned on me. He abandoned the doting father act entirely. "Are you happy now?" he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at me across the dance floor. "You jealous, bitter, barren spinster. You couldn't stand that she was the center of attention. You had to destroy it. We gave you life. We raised you. And this is how you repay us? By humiliating us?" The insults washed over me. Barren, spinster, ingrate. A week ago, those words would have drawn blood. They would have made me question my worth. But tonight, they sounded like the desperate rattling of a caged door. I didn't need to answer. The crowd answered for me. A low boo started from the back of the room. It wasn't organized, but it was audible. Someone shouted, "Shame on you." Another voice, a woman's voice from the Sterling side, said clearly, "She paid for your house, you monster." My father recoiled. He looked at the crowd he had tried so hard to charm. He saw hundreds of faces looking at him not with envy, but with revulsion. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that family was not a magic word that excused abuse. It was a bond he had severed the moment he picked up a pen and traced my name. At table 19, the photographer's assistant was frantically typing on his phone. I recognized the look. He wasn't texting a friend. He was uploading. Near the bar, a woman in a red dress, I recognized her as a local lifestyle blogger Paisley had invited for clout, was speaking rapidly into her phone. Live streaming the collapse, the hashtag Harper Wedding was about to trend, but not for the decor. The band, confused by the lack of instruction, was still playing a soft jazz instrumental. The juxtaposition of the pleasant saxophone music with the carnage on the dance floor made the scene feel surreal, like a horror movie set in a country club. I watched Caleb and Eleanor walk out the double doors. They didn't look back. I watched Paisley collapse into a chair. Her dress billowing around her like a deflated parachute, she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. But the sound was drowned out by the rising tide of conversation. My mother was standing over her, patting her shoulder mechanically, but her eyes were darting around the room, calculating the social fallout. She wasn't comforting her child. She was assessing the damage to her status. I realized then that I was done. There was no more data to collect. The risk had been realized, the system had failed, and I had survived the crash. I turned to Dylan. "We are leaving," I said. Dylan nodded. He closed his briefcase with a satisfying snap. He picked it up and fell into step beside me. As I walked toward the exit, the sea of guests parted again. But this time, the energy was different. It wasn't just shock, it was respect. A man I didn't know, An older gentleman with a sterling family resemblance nodded to me as I passed. "Good for you," he murmured. I didn't stop. I kept my rhythm. Thump step, thump step. I walked past the gift table, piled high with blenders and crystal vases. I walked past the guest book I hadn't signed. I walked past the poster of Paisley and Caleb that stood on an easel, smiling a lie that was now permanently defaced by the truth. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the night. The cold air of the mountains hit my face, sharp and clean. It smelled of pine and snow, not expensive perfume and stale lies. I walked to the edge of the curb where the valet stand was waiting. My leg was throbbing. My back was aching. I was exhausted in a way that went down to my marrow. I wasn't happy. Happiness implies a gain. I hadn't gained anything tonight. I was still out $400,000. I was still homeless. I was still orphaned, in every way that mattered. But as I stood there, watching the snow fall under the streetlights, I felt something else. I felt weightless. For 34 years, I had been carrying them. I had carried their expectations. I had carried their debts. I had carried their secrets. I had carried the heavy, suffocating burden of being the strong ones so they could be the careless ones. Tonight, I had put it down. I took a deep breath. The icy air filled my lungs, stinging and wonderful. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a notification from the smart home system in Fort Collins. Motion detected. Front porch. I swiped it away. It didn't matter who was on the porch. It didn't matter what they were saying. It wasn't their house anymore, and I wasn't their daughter anymore. I looked up at the night sky. The stars were bright, indifferent, and beautiful. I am here. I whispered to the dark. I wasn't a bank account. I wasn't a safety net. I wasn't a doormat. I was Avery Harper. And for the first time in my life, everybody knew it. The fallout from the wedding did not happen all at once. It did not explode like a bomb. It toppled like a row of heavy, expensive dominoes, one clicking into the next with a terrifying, rhythmic inevitability. The first domino was Caleb Sterling. I expected him to leave the reception. I did not expect him to move with the speed of a man escaping a burning building. 72 hours after the microphone hit the floor in Vail, Caleb's legal team filed for an annulment. It was not a divorce. A divorce implies a marriage that failed. An annulment implies a marriage that never validly existed. The grounds cited were fraud and the concealment of material financial liabilities. In the state of Colorado, lying about a felony that funded the wedding ceremony is apparently a very strong argument for voiding the contract. Caleb did not call Paisley. He did not text her. He simply vanished from her life, replaced by a team of lawyers who sent a demand letter to my parents. The Sterling family wanted reimbursement. They wanted their share of the rehearsal dinner costs back. They wanted the deposit for the honeymoon suite returned. They were not doing this because they needed the money. The Sterlings had money to burn. They were doing it to make a point. They were scrubbing the stain of the Harper family off their ledger. The second domino was Paisley's digital empire. The video of my speech, filmed by the lifestyle blogger in the red dress, had gone viral before the waiters had even cleared the untouched filet mignon. It had 2 million views by midnight. By the next morning, it was on the front page of Reddit. Paisley had spent years cultivating an image of effortless perfection. She was the it girl, the bride who had everything, but the internet loves a villain more than it loves a princess. I watched it happen from my laptop in my quiet rental. I didn't have to lift a finger. The comment section, once filled with heart emojis and goals, turned into a firing squad. Imagine stealing your sister's house to pay for a party. Trash. I used to love her content. Unfollowing. Team Avery. Then came the sponsors. A luggage company that had sent Paisley free suitcases for the honeymoon posted a public statement distancing themselves from her brand. A skincare line that had paid her to promote their Wedding Glow serum quietly scrubbed her face from their website. In 48 hours, Paisley Harper went from being a lifestyle influencer to a cautionary tale. She lost 11,000 followers in a single day. She locked her account. But the damage was done. She wasn't an influencer anymore. She was a pariah. The third domino hit closer to home. My father worked, or rather, used to work, as a regional compliance officer for a mid-sized logistics firm. It was a job that required a high degree of trust and ethical standing. On Wednesday morning, 3 days after the wedding, he was called into a meeting with Human Resources. They didn't fire him for what he did to me. That was a private family matter. They fired him for reputational risk. The video had circulated. Clients had seen it. The partners had seen it. A man who steals from his own daughter via forged government documents cannot be trusted to manage corporate compliance. He was placed on immediate, indefinite, unpaid administrative leave pending an internal investigation. It was the corporate polite way of saying, "Clean out your desk." My mother was next. Her life revolved around the Fort Collins Ladies Charitable Auxiliary. It was a group of wealthy, bored women who threw galas and judged each other's table settings. My mother was the treasurer. On Thursday, she received an email from the board president. I saw it because Dylan had subpoenaed their communications as part of our asset search. Dear Linda, in light of recent distressing public allegations regarding financial irregularities within your family, the board feels it would be best if you step down from your role as treasurer, effective immediately. We also ask that you refrain from attending the spring gala, to avoid becoming a distraction. It was a social execution. For a woman like my mother, being uninvited from the gala was a fate worse than death. By Friday, the silence from my family broke. They realized that ignoring me was no longer an option. The walls were closing in, and I was the only one holding the key. My phone rang. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Then my mother called. Then Paisley called. I waited until 5 o'clock in the evening. Then, I answered. Avery? My father's voice was unrecognizable. It was cracked, broken, stripped of all its bluster. Avery, please, we need to talk. I am listening. I said. I had Dylan on the other line, listening in on mute. You have to stop this, he said. Not a command, but a beg. The eviction notice, the police report. Avery, they came to the house today. The police came to the door. They asked questions about the notary. You committed a crime. Dad, I said, that is what happens. We are your parents. My mother shouted from the background. We gave you life. How can you be so cruel? We are 60 years old. You are going to put us on the street? You put yourselves on the street. I said, you signed a lease. You violated the lease. You committed fraud in the property. Clause 4B. Avery, please. My father sobbed. He was actually crying. It was a jarring sound. I lost my job. Your mother is... She is a wreck. Paisley is suicidal. We have nothing. If you evict us, we have nowhere to go. Our credit is ruined. No one will rent to us. I sat in my chair, looking out at the rain. I felt a twinge of pity, a reflex from a childhood spent trying to please them. But then I remembered the 87 missed calls while I was in surgery. I remembered the $18,000 for flowers. I remembered the text from Paisley laughing about me selling my condo. I have a proposal. I said. Silence on the other end. I will not drop the criminal charges. I said, that is out of my hands. The district attorney will decide if they want to prosecute, but I can control the eviction and the civil suit for the money. What? What do you want? Dad asked. I want a confession. I said, what? I want a signed, notarized affidavit. I said, I want you to admit, in writing, that you forged my signature, that you stole the condo, that you stole the $425,000. I want you to list exactly where every cent went. And if we do? He asked. If you do? I continued. And if you agree to a strict repayment plan, garnishing your pension, liquidating your assets, whatever it takes, I will pause the eviction. I will let you stay in the house on a month-to-month basis, provided you pay market rent, plus the repayment installments. But we cannot afford that, Mom screamed. We spent the money on the wedding. Caleb's family wants their money back too. That is a math problem for you to solve. I said coldly, sell the cars. Sell the jewelry. Sell the furniture. I do not care. But you will pay me back. Every single dime. And if we don't? Dad asked. If you don't, I said. The eviction proceeds on May 1st. The civil lawsuit proceeds immediately, and I will hand over every text message, every recording, and every email to the district attorney to ensure you serve maximum time. There was a long silence. We need time to think. Dad whispered, You have 24 hours. I said, Dylan will email you the agreement. I hung up and exhaled. I felt drained. It wasn't a victory. It was a negotiation with terrorists who happened to share my DNA. 10 minutes later, Dylan called me on the secure line. That was brutal. He said, Effective, but brutal. They need to know I am not playing. I said, Agreed, Dylan said. But Avery, we found something else. My stomach tightened. Something else? We were digging into their financials to prepare for the repayment plan. Dylan said, We pulled their tax returns for the last 10 years. And we found a discrepancy. What kind of discrepancy? Do you remember your grandmother? Dylan asked. Rose Harper? Of course, I said. She died when I was 22. She was the only one who ever remembered my birthday. Dylan hesitated. There is a Schedule K-1 form from 8 years ago attached to your father's return. It lists a distribution from the Rose Harper Testamentary Trust. I frowned. Grandma didn't have money. She lived in a small apartment. She left me a quilt and a box of recipes. That is what you were told, Dylan said. But according to this filing, the trust had a corpus of $80,000, and the beneficiary listed was you. My stomach dropped. Me? Yes, Dylan said. It looks like she left it for your education or a down payment. But you were 22. You were just graduating college. I never saw a dime. I whispered. I know, Dylan said. The records show the trust was dissolved 6 months after she died. The funds were transferred to a joint account, the same joint account your parents use now, the same account the condo money went into. I closed my eyes. $80,000. 8 years ago. That was the year Paisley dropped out of community college and decided to find herself in Europe for 6 months. My parents had paid for that trip. They said they had saved up for it. They hadn't saved up. They had used my inheritance. They stole from my dead grandmother to pay for Paisley's vacation. I said, my voice was shaking. It looks that way, Dylan said. We need to verify the trust documents. But if this is true, Avery, this isn't just about the condo. This is a pattern. They have been looting you for a decade. I felt a cold rage that was entirely different from the anger about the house. The house was money I had earned, the inheritance. That was love. That was Grandma Rose trying to take care of me from beyond the grave. And they had intercepted it. They had stolen her final act of love and turned it into a hostel stay for Paisley. I need to be sure. I told Dylan. How? The documents are likely destroyed. Not all of them. I said, I know who would know. I hung up and grabbed my car keys. I didn't care about the pain in my leg. I drove to the outskirts of Denver, to a small, dusty neighborhood of 1970s ranch houses. I pulled into the driveway of a house with peeling blue paint and a garden full of ceramic gnomes. It was Aunt Renee's house. Renee was my mother's older sister. She was the black sheep of the family because she had married a mechanic and refused to play the social climbing games my mother loved. We hadn't spoken much, mostly because my mother actively discouraged it. Calling Renee low class, I knocked on the door. Renee opened it. She was wearing a faded Broncos sweatshirt and holding a cigarette. She looked at me, my cane, my pale face, my determination. She didn't look surprised. I heard about the wedding, she said. Her voice was rough, like sandpaper. Hell of a show. Kid, can I come in? I asked. She stepped back. Coffee is on. I sat at her cluttered kitchen table. It smelled of smoke and cinnamon. Aunt Renee. I said, Did Grandma leave me money? Renee stopped pouring the coffee. She set the pot down slowly. She turned to look at me. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been carrying a secret that was too heavy for her. You found out, she said. It wasn't a question. She left me $80,000, didn't she? 75. Renee corrected. plus interest. She sold her little plot of land in Nebraska right before she passed. She wanted you to have it, she said. Avery is the smart one. She will do something good with it. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. My voice cracked. Renee sighed. She sat down and lit another cigarette. I tried. Avery, when she died, your dad was the executor. He told me he was putting it in a high-yield account for you. He said he didn't want you to blow it on nonsense right out of college. He said he was protecting you. She took a drag. A year later, I saw Paisley posting photos from Paris. I asked your mom how they afforded it. She got squirrely, said Peter got a bonus, but I knew. Peter hadn't got a bonus in 10 years. So you knew they stole it? I suspected. Renee said, I confronted your mom. She told me to mind my own business. She said, Avery has a job. Avery is fine. Paisley needs help. She told me if I said anything to you, she would cut me off from the family completely. She said I would never see you girls again. Renee looked at me, her eyes watering. I was a coward. Avery, I didn't have the money to fight them in court, and I didn't want to lose my nieces, so I kept my mouth shut. I thought maybe they would pay you back eventually. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her hand was rough, calloused. I am sorry, she whispered. I looked at her. I wasn't angry at her. She was just another victim of their bullying. Do you have a copy of the will? I asked. Or a letter? Anything? Renee nodded. She stood up and walked to a hutch in the corner. She pulled out an old, battered tin box. She dug through receipts and photos until she found a yellowed envelope. Rose gave me this, she said, in case Peter lost the official one. She handed it to me. I opened it. It was a handwritten letter from my grandmother, to my dearest Avery. It read, This is for your future. Do not let anyone tell you that you are not enough. You are the strongest of them all. Love, Grandma. I held the letter. I felt the tears finally come. Not for the money, but for the validation. They had stolen this. They had stolen the moment where I would have read this and known I was loved. They had traded this letter for a trip to the Eiffel Tower for the golden child. I stood up. I carefully folded the letter and put it in my pocket. Thank you. Renee, I said. What are you going to do? She asked. I looked at the peeling paint on her walls. I looked at the woman who had been silenced by fear of my parents. I'm going to get it back. I said, all of it. I walked out to my car. I called Dylan, add it to the list. I said, the inheritance fraud, the breach of fiduciary duty as an executor. We are going nuclear? Dylan asked. No, I said. I looked at the letter in my hand. We are going archaeological. I want to know everything. I want to know about the college fund they said didn't exist. I want to know about the car insurance settlements. I want to dig until we hit bedrock. They didn't just sell my condo. Dylan, they have been strip mining my existence since I was born, and I am going to send them the bill for every single ounce of ore. The courtroom did not smell like imported peonies or expensive steak. It smelled of floor wax, old paper, and the stale coffee from the vending machine in the hallway. It was a sterile, unforgiving environment, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at home. I was not there to scream. I was not there to cry. I was there to file the paperwork that would turn my family's betrayal into a matter of public record. The legal complaint was thick, 150 pages of exhibits, timestamps, and forensic analysis. We were alleging first-degree forgery, identity theft, and wire fraud. My father's lawyer, a tired-looking man who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, tried to argue that this was a domestic dispute that had spiraled out of control. He used words like misunderstanding and implied consent, but the law does not deal in feelings. It deals in facts. When the judge looked at the timeline Dylan presented, the room went very quiet. On one screen, we showed the hospital log. Patient Avery Harper, intubated, operating room 4, 10:15 in the morning. On the other screen, we showed the notary log, deed signed by Avery Harper, Starbucks on Main Street, 10:15 in the morning. There was no gray area. There was no family interpretation. It was physics. I could not be in two places at once. The judge, a woman with sharp glasses and zero patience for nonsense, looked at my parents. They were sitting at the defense table, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. My mother was wearing a gray cardigan, trying to look like a sympathetic grandmother. My father was staring at his hands. The judge ruled that the power of attorney was null and void ab initio, from the beginning. This meant the sale of my condo was fraudulent. However, because the buyers were innocent, reversing the sale would take years. Instead, the court ordered an immediate freezing of all assets held by Peter and Linda Harper to facilitate restitution. The narrative of the loving family helping out did not just crack, it shattered into dust. The court reporter typed every word, capturing the reality that my parents were not martyrs, they were just incompetent thieves. While the court was dissecting the condo sale, the second clock was ticking down in Fort Collins. I had sent the notice of termination for the house my parents lived in. The deadline was May 1st. My mother had called me, hysterical, begging for a reprieve. She said they had nowhere to go. She said the neighbors were talking. She said I was being vindictive. I did not answer the phone. I let Dylan handle it. He sent a simple reply. The landlord is exercising her right to recover possession of the property. Please ensure the premises are broom cleaned by noon on the 1st. They had a choice. They could have tried to fight the eviction, but that would have required them to stand in front of another judge and explain why they had used the rental property as a base of operations to rob their landlord. They knew they would lose, but the final blow, the one that truly ended the war, came from the past. We successfully petitioned to open the sealed records of the Rose Harper Testamentary Trust. My parents had fought this the hardest. They had filed motions to quash the subpoena, claiming it was irrelevant to the condo case, but Dylan argued that it established a pattern of financial abuse. The judge agreed. When the bank records were unsealed, it was exactly as Aunt Renee had suspected, $80,000. My grandmother had left me $80,000 to help me buy my first home. The records showed that my father, acting as executor, had transferred the funds to his personal account 3 days after the probate period ended. The memo line on the transfer did not say Avery's Trust. It said, household expenses. I looked at the transaction date. It was the same month Paisley had gone to Europe. It was the same month my father had bought a new truck. They had not just stolen my money, they had stolen my grandmother's legacy. They had taken the last tangible proof that someone in this family loved me, and they had spent it on gas and souvenirs. When that evidence hit the table, my parents stopped fighting. They realized that if they pushed this to a criminal trial, they would go to prison, not for a few months, but for years. The theft of the trust fund was a separate felony, and unlike the condo, there was no emergency wedding excuse to hide behind. Paisley tried to reach out one last time. She did not come to my house. She sent a message through a mutual acquaintance, asking to meet at a coffee shop. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to look her in the eye one last time. She looked terrible. The glow was gone. She was wearing sweatpants and no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked like exactly what she was, a 29-year-old woman with no job, no husband, and no prospects. Avery, she said, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. This has gone too far. Mom and Dad are talking about bankruptcy. They are going to lose the house. They lost the house 4 years ago. I said, they just forgot to tell you. We can fix this, Paisley said. Leaning forward, look, I know you are mad about the money, but if you drop the lawsuit, I can help you. I can get my followers back. We can do a reconciliation series. We can monetize the drama. We can split the profits. You could make your $400,000 back in endorsements. I stared at her, even now, in the ruins of her life. She was trying to sell tickets to the disaster. She did not understand that some things were not content. I do not want followers. Paisley, I said, and I do not want your help. But why? She demanded, her voice rising. Why do you have to be so rigid? We are sisters. No, I said, we are relatives. There is a difference. Sisters protect each other. You treated me like an ATM with a pulse, and now the machine is out of order. I stood up and left her there. I did not pay for her coffee. That afternoon, I met with Caleb Sterling and his legal team. Caleb looked older. The boyish charm was gone, replaced by a weary cynicism. He needed my help. His annulment depended on proving that Paisley had entered the marriage under false pretenses. He needed the timeline of the fraud to prove she was complicit in a crime at the time of the vows. I gave him everything. I gave him the texts where Paisley joked about selling my condo. I gave him the emails where she discussed the budget with my mother, knowing exactly where the funds were coming from. In exchange, Caleb gave me the final piece of the puzzle. He provided a sworn affidavit that my father had offered to invest Caleb's trust fund money in a surefire real estate opportunity 2 months before the wedding. My father had been trying to scam Caleb too. The condo theft was just Plan B because Plan A failed. With Caleb's testimony, the noose was tight. The settlement was signed 2 weeks later. My parents avoided prison, but only barely. They agreed to a consent judgment. They admitted to the fraud and the theft of the trust. To repay me, they were forced to liquidate their retirement accounts and sell their collection of antique cars. It did not cover the full $425,000, plus the $80,000 from the trust, plus interest. But it was everything they had. They were left with a state pension that was barely enough to survive. They had to vacate the Fort Collins house. I did not renew the lease. I did not offer them a payment plan. I simply enforced the contract. On May 1st, I drove to the house. The driveway was empty. They were gone. They had moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, a place with thin walls and no view. Paisley had moved in with them. She had no choice. Her reputation was radioactive. No brand would touch her. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office, a job she hated, to help pay the rent. I walked through the empty house. It echoed with the ghosts of my childhood. I saw the spot on the carpet where my father used to pace while lecturing me about responsibility. I saw the kitchen table where my mother used to ignore me while planning Paisley's parties. I did not feel sad. I felt like I was walking through a museum of ancient history. I did not move into the house. I did not sell it. Instead, I hired a contractor to repaint the walls. We got rid of the beige and the brown. We painted it bright, airy colors. We fixed the roof. We planted a new garden. Then, I listed it for rent. I found a young couple. They were teachers. They had a baby on the way and were struggling to afford the rising rents in the city. They were kind. They were grateful. I rented it to them for 30% below market rate. The income from the rent did not go into my pocket. I set up a new trust, the Rose Harper Foundation. Every dollar of profit from that house went to a legal aid fund for victims of familial financial abuse. It paid for lawyers for people like me, people who had been robbed by the ones who were supposed to protect them. The final scene of this chapter of my life happened on a Tuesday. I was standing on the porch of the Fort Collins house. The new tenants were moving in next week. The house was empty, clean, and silent. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. I looked at the driveway where my car had been hit months ago. Starting this entire chain of events, I touched the scar on my abdomen. It was still there, a thin pink line, but it didn't hurt anymore. I had lost my condo. I had lost my parents. I had lost my sister. But as I stood there, holding the keys to a house that was finally, truly mine, I realized what I had gained. I had gained the truth. I wasn't the difficult one. I wasn't the selfish one. I was the one who survived. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut. The latch clicked. A solid, mechanical sound. It was the sound of a boundary that would never be crossed again. I locked the door with my own hand. No forged signatures, no proxies, no lies. I walked down the steps, got into my car, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there I needed. The road ahead was clear, and for the first time in 34 years, I was the only one behind the wheel. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment down below and share your thoughts on Avery's decision. Did she go too far? Or was it exactly what they deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Monica Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the like button to help this video get discovered by more people who need to hear it.